Starting. Yes, we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this live session. This live session is entirely focused on Debussy's Prélude à l'après-midi d'une faune. It's actually a piece that one of you asked me last week in the last live session. So I took a chance to the opportunity actually to do a live session entirely on it, and we're going to go through some quirks about the tempo, the structure, of course, how it is the score can be split in different blocks, some of part of the harmonic challenges of this piece. And of course the entire score and some things about conducting it. Now, for the first thing, I want to talk about the tempo for a little bit, because one of the comments that came up in the Facebook group and was very intelligent one and very accurately researched one was about a note that Debussy left on one of his scores. He left it in pencil. So as you know, the score in itself doesn't have any tempo indication in terms of metronome marking. It only has this vague très modéré, which means very moderate. So, but in one of his scores, Debussy left a marking in pencil which had the dotted quarter equal to 44. Dotted quarter equal to 44 means that the tempo is actually quite faster than what we're used to hear it nowadays. Actually, than what we've been used to hear it for quite a long time. However, the question that was posed was, shouldn't we follow Debussy's indication, even though they're not, let's say, official, and they're just marked in pencil in a score that he had? Well, my take on it is that we shouldn't be too dogmatic about it. I mean, I'm all about following the composer's intentions and doing what's written on the page and everything else. However, there are two things that we need to consider. One, that we cannot mechanically and pedantically follow exactly what's there in terms of metronome marking. So if we accept that it was dotted quarter equal 44 and we went with that fast tempo, which could be an interpretative choice, that's perfectly fine, but we also have to consider when that marking was written down, in what situation, in what condition, what was the whole, who was the flutist. Because the first passage, as you know, it's 4 bars long, and most flutists actually do it, or are required to do it, or suggested to do it at least during an audition, in one breath. So there are several components that come into play. Again, the whole, does it have a short reverb, a long reverb? What kind of acoustic does it have? And on top of everything else, this is a little quote that I put from, that you see on the screen, from a French historian, and you actually find he actually wrote the preface to the Eulenburg edition of the Debussy Prélude à l'après-midi d'une faune. And in referring to Mallarmé, he said Mallarmé had imagined to suppress all syntax, to reduce words to the role of musical sounds, and to express sensations by combinations of verbal sounds. And this is exactly what Debussy does, and this is exactly what impressionistic music is about. It's something that you cannot touch directly. It's something that has blurred contours. It's something that you have to smell. You have to smell its scent before anything else. And it's something that is more of a skin sensation than a rigid, defined and clear path path of metronome markings. Even when you find the metronome markings, which for instance you find in Ravel. If you look at Ravel's, I don't know, Daphne et Chloé, it's full of metronome markings. However, if we do that pedantically, what's left out of you as a conductor? Where is your interpretative choice in this matter? Moreover, there is also another thing. This piece begins with a solo flute, and by solo flute I mean solo flute. There's nobody else playing underneath for the first three and then some bars. So also the sensitivity and the sensibility of the soloist comes into play. Although this should not be treated, in my opinion, as a solo passage as you have in a concerto, where the soloist has the biggest part and the biggest impact on the work, so technically has a bigger saying, if we want to put it in layman terms. But in this case, usually everything is prepared, rehearsed ahead or discussed ahead. What you usually do, you take the flutist into your dressing room and you talk for 10 minutes or so about all the solo passages, especially the beginning, and you discuss one breath, two breaths, three breaths, one long breath for 4 bars, or whatever your choice is, in accordance with the flutist himself or herself. So I hope this answered the question about the tempo, because being too dogmatic and too rigid about it is going to take away from your own feeling, I think. There's another thing that you need to consider. Whatever the tempo that you choose, this is not something that is to be done, is to be played in a strict tempo. What's happening here? The faune is waking up, and you don't wake up on a metronome marking. You wake up slowly. You open your eyes, you stretch a little bit, and from there comes the push and pull, which to me, if the tempo is too fast, sort of loses its color, its charm. Now, if we look at the structure of the piece, moving on, the piece is about 10 minutes long, and it has exactly 110 bars. We can split it roughly in an A and B section. First bar to 54, and second section, B section, from 55 to the end. However, within the second section, section B, we have a repetition, or not exactly a repetition, but a reprise of the themes of the theme of the first section. So the piece becomes actually A, B, A. On top of that, the first section, the big section A, can be split into 2 parts. And as we move along, the first part is of course from bar 1 to bar 30. The second part begins not here, actually begins here, sorry. It begins here on big number 5, bar 31 to 54. And all of this is still an elaboration and of the first theme with added material. Moving on, the third part, part B, begins in this really magical, lovely, enchanting moment that personally I love so much, where the second part of the B section, or the return of the A section, begins where the first theme comes back on. Basically, there are 2 main themes within the entire work. One is the one that we know from the beginning, from the solo flute, and the other one is this one that starts the B section. Now, talking about the first theme, this has something to do with conducting as well. How do you conduct this? I strongly advise and suggest not to conduct the flutist, the soloist at the beginning, because you can discuss. It's 4 bars to actually, not even, it's 3 bars plus one beat. You can discuss it, you can tell him or her what it is that you want, you work it out separately, and then you breathe, and he or she will go down and play the whole thing. There is no need to disturb one player with this. That to me is over conducting, and it actually is distracting for the players, because imagine this: if you're on the other side, you have one line to play by yourself, there's nobody else, and you have somebody in front of you doing this to you all for in 9/8, perhaps even subdivided for 3.5 bars. It's unnecessary. And as a conductor, one of the most difficult things that we need to learn is to give up control when it's not necessary. You can trust the players to do whatever it is that they need to do. And to this we add another reason why we shouldn't conduct the flutist at the beginning. Again, this is a passage that has a lot of push and pull in it. If you start, you'll forget my singing, but I'm not a singer and I don't really care. You have to understand the intention behind it. And this is an exercise that you can practice as conductors in front of the orchestra. You want to know, you want to make your intention come through, and you can't explain it with words, or you don't have the time to explain it with words, sing it. Nobody cares if you sing out of tune. Toscanini sang out of tune all the times. Nobody cared one bit. So the point is that the flutist needs time to breathe through the phrase and do all the push and pull that these 3 bars need to be successful. But after that, we repeat, Debussy repeats the solo flute, not solo anymore. And that's where your conducting then comes in. And that's where your thinking comes in as a conductor, because depending on the orchestration that you have, the phrase and the phrasing and the push and pull inside the phrasing will change. So if you look at how different the orchestration is, all the times that it comes back from solo flute, we go to flute plus strings in tremolo. Then we go to flute and harp. Then we go to flute and harp and strings in tremolo. And then when it comes back in the second A section, we go to flute and harp and strings, but not in tremolo anymore, held down. Then of course Debussy changes the harmony and goes from an E major to an E flat major with oboe and harp and strings held again. Then flutes and strings in tremolo, and then finally flute and cello plus strings in tremolo. And all of these combinations create every time a different color. That's what you need to think when you conduct this piece, or when you conduct any Debussy or Ravel or impressionistic piece. You need to think in colors. You need to let the imagination go and try to find what the sensation is. That's why I'm saying that Debussy did what Mallarmé was doing with words, taking the mere meaning out of the words and transform them into something that you sort of see and not see. And the same thing is with the music. You can't touch it, you have to imagine it, and you have to feel it completely, and you have to feel all its different tingle emotions, whatever it is that it's changing from one moment to another. Moving on, actually, I want to point something out about the harmony. Because when we start from the beginning, Debussy starts with the solo flute has a triton. Now, a triton usually is used for tension. However, in this case, the phrase is everything but tense. It's actually piano. It's marked dolce and espressivo, doux and espressive. So it acquires a completely different meaning. Now, we are used to hear this because we've heard it for 100 years now. But people at the time were not used to hear the triton or these combinations of harmony in this particular context. And when you conduct the piece, you have to remember also one other thing, that it's true that we've heard it for 100 years. It's true that you, as a conductor, may have heard it or conducted it 100 times. However, there will be somebody in the audience for whom it will be the first time ever. And it will be a surprise. That's why when we conduct things and there is a surprise, we don't want to give it out to the audience by, for instance, making big gestures or jumping around or all this nonsense, because it just gives out the surprise to whoever hasn't heard it for the first time. It might make you feel good, but it's not good for the music, and it's not good for who is listening to the music itself. Now, coming back to the harmony, we start with the triton, and then what happens? We are in E major, right? It says so nicely in here. We're in E major. However, on the fourth bar, we have an A sharp. Now, an A sharp in an E major scale is basically a Lydian mood, Lydian scale. A Lydian scale is nothing but a major scale with the fourth degree up half a step. So if you're in D major, in E major, it would be the A flat, which creates this sort of familiar but unsettling in a way kind of it's not even a tension, but kind of sensation. By the way, the Lydian mode is one of the most beloved by the Hollywood industry. If you listen to, I don't know, the E.T. Soundtrack, it's full of that, and so are many others. Just pay attention next time that that you watch a movie or you listen to a soundtrack from a movie. You'll find 90% of the time you'll find a Lydian scale in it. Now, this Lydian scale is also transformed harmonically, and then what happens? We go to the next bar. The A sharp becomes a B flat and becomes the root of a B flat 7 chord, which then would need to resolve on E flat. But Debussy, being Debussy, doesn't make it resolve, and it goes suspended and unresolved. And what happens? Debussy, not only does not resolve the chord, but puts a full rest bar for everybody in the middle. Why? Again, because the faune is waking up. You don't wake up in time. You wake up and then you sort of maybe snooze off a little bit, and then you try to wake up again. That's what the harp is about. It's sort of when you open your eyes and you start realizing that you're not asleep anymore, and then maybe you close them again for a bit, and then you open them again until finally you get you're woken up completely. The point being is that even when you study this piece, this is not functional harmony in the sense of that we can find, I don't know, in Brahms, for instance, or before that in Beethoven, in Haydn, in Mozart, in Schubert, whoever you want to. This is a different type of approach. You cannot think about it that way. You know who thinks about harmony in this way nowadays? Jazz players, who really do not care about moving from one place to another through weird or unconventional ways. And as a matter of fact, jazz music took so much from the impressionistic composers. Bill Evans, one of the greatest jazz pianists, was a fan of Debussy and of his use of tenth, which Bill Evans himself incorporated in his own music. Anyway, I digress. Moving on with this thing, with the harmony subject. I'm telling you this because this impacts your conducting. This will impact your conducting every time you conduct this piece, because depending on how you feel this particular harmony or that particular scale, you will conduct a piece in a different way. Maybe you do a little more of push and pull. Maybe you do a longer rallentando. Maybe you do a faster accelerando or maybe you bring out a particular part, a particular voice, a particular player, because excuse me, because it resonates in a certain way with your own sensibility. There is one episode that happened to Debussy when he was in school. Actually, he was still a student at conservatory, and he tried something out at the piano, and he went on with a particularly, let's say, unusual chord. And all of his colleagues or schoolmates asked him to define the chord. So what is it? Is it I don't know, an altered fourth, an altered fifth, a seventh without an 11th without the seventh? What is it harmonically speaking? How do you define it? And his answer was, who cares? Listen to how it sounds. This is the core of Debussy's music. Listen to how it sounds before you start delving into what it is, because it could actually be at the same time 2 or 3 different things depending on how you look at it. Let's move on and let's analyze, do a little bit of score analysis throughout the piece. Now, we've already been through in the beginning, the solo flute, leave the solo alone, let it do whatever he or she is doing, that you've agreed ahead of time, of course, because you're still the conductor, and you can start conduct on bar 4. And when you get to bar 4, what you need to give is a pulse on the downbeat, pom, so that the oboes and clarinets and the horn and of course then the harp can come down clearly on the second beat. You can also make, if you want, a little bit of a rallentando on the first beat when you get here. Pi, pi, ram, pi, ram. And then you go down. Do not move an eyelash during the big rest bar. It's silence, it's quiet, start again, and everything is really contained here in your sort of mid-chest part. There is really no need for much movement, hardly any actually. Now, the same thing happens at number 1. The theme comes back, but now you have the clarinets holding the harmony underneath, and of course you have the strings in tremolo. What you can do is you can play with the push and pull of the flute, and now you can actually control it the way that you want. if you look at the change in this part, you have the clarinet here, you have the tremolos here, but then here you have the horns, and here the oboe comes in. So it's not exactly the same setup that you had at the beginning. It's actually quite different. You have to imagine this faun, I don't know, maybe stretching, or stretching his goat legs, trying to find his way back into reality. And this is a kicker if reality really is, because this entire piece, it doesn't say anywhere that it is a descriptive scene by scene piece. Perhaps it happens all in the mind of the faun himself. Maybe he's not woken up and he's not going after the nymphs for real, but he's only dreaming of doing it. And this is another layer, another aspect that will play into your mind when you feel how to conduct this piece, and that impacts how you conduct this part, for instance. You want to give it a little more of a push and pull in this section, and then move the phrase along with the espressivo of the oboe. That's definitely an option. Then you can come back at the end of the oboe, and one thing that you certainly will need to do is breathe before this bar. You need to breathe before this bar, because if you look at how the phrase and the piece is constructed, you have these 4 bars, then the oboe takes over the line of the flute and stretches the thought, the musical thought of the flute, for another 2 bars. But then we have something different, we have a different episode. So when you get to this part, I'm on the oboe line, la, breathe, ti, and you can move the tempo, so that you have enough room, you give yourself enough room to make the rallentando, which is written over here. And this brings back once more the first theme, this time in 12/8, with the harp, first harp going down in arpeggio. It's a little more lively here. The faun is definitely waking up, which means also that since it's in 12/8, it's stretched already. It shouldn't be too slow either. It also says light and expressive, and there's a crescendo, there's different swells, different dynamics that play into it. Excuse me for a second. See, all of this first part of this prelude is all done in little pieces, small fractions of 4 bars, 2 bars, 3 bars, depending on where you are, that make inner phrases within which you can work the meaning of that inner phrase by yourself. And here the phrase comes back again. However, we have a different type of play, different type of game between the flute and the oboe. They're chasing each other. Perhaps the faun starts running. Perhaps he starts going around the woods looking for these for these nymphs. I don't know. Make up your own story with this. It's your imagination that needs to be working here to make magic out of this piece, and not just have a good run through of it. Now, when you do, once you get to number 3, what I actually suggest is to stop on this meaning, You end the phrase here, and this starts a new phrase that's connected to this, right? So when you get there, you get to the oboe, ti, pam, pim. You give an extra pulse. Sorry, to the clarinet. You give an extra pulse on the second. Here, on the second eighth note of the G sharp, and that will give you a perfect attacca, perfect tempo, perfect ensemble on the downbeat of this bar of number 3. Take good note of this part in the cello, because that adds some mystery, some excitement. Something is happening here. The harmony is changing, the situation is changing, the atmosphere has changed almost completely. And what you need to do is to really have all these elements emerge. It's in pianissimo, yes, but it's in pianissimo because you have one clarinet here who's also going into a diminuendo. The horns have sordines that add that sort of nasal, squeaky, a little more raspy sound, and that helps making the atmosphere changes, the color of the music that's changing. And of course then you have the excitement underneath, this fast 30 seconds that play against the 30 seconds of the clarinet here. And of course they come back again when the situation repeats itself. See what we have here: 1 bar, 2 bars, 3 bars, and then the situation repeats itself again. Same thing. Underneath, 3 bar, second bar, 3 bars. So it's 3 plus 3. That's your phrase structure before you get to number 4, where something else happens. The atmosphere changes again. And as a matter of fact, to help doing that, since this game of chasing each other within the by the woodwinds goes on for these 6 bars, when you get here, and especially when you get to the last beat of this bar, you can make a small rallentando, so that you can prepare the animando that's coming after. By the way, and here's a small technical trick. This part of the flute is in forte. There's no diminuendo here. However, this is dolce and espressivo, and then we go, and it's a piano dynamic. So what you can do in order to make that happen and take a breath with the oboe at the same time, you get to the last beat of the bar, trill, do not go down. Do not go down on the downbeat of bar number 4. You stay up. When you get there, you just give a pulse. The pulse will have the color, will have the tempo, will have everything in it, and instead of going down and making a forte gesture, you stay up, and the sound of the oboe will be much, not just lighter, but rounder, not to mention softer. This is another point where you have to be a little more careful, because the whole thing, this old passage, is in animando, so you're speeding up, right? And when you get to this point, you get the whole string, the whole violins sections, both of them, first and second violins, in octave. Usually, especially if it's an orchestra that you do not know, that you haven't worked with a few times, they can get carried away. So you need to be very clear in your intention and in your accelerando, in your animando. Don't do too much of it, basically, because you only have this before you have another always animando. So if you give it up too soon, then you have no way to go, and you still need to breathe between section in order for all of this to happen and to come through. Now, after this animando section, we have a very slow rallentando, because the music slows down already by itself if you look at the way that it is written. And then of course Debussy marks a rallentando in the score himself, and this has to be a very long and subtle but precise diminuendo, so that you do the diminuendo and the rallentando and the diminuendo and the rallentando and the diminuendo, and then when you get to number 6, you have this beautiful phrase of the clarinet coming out. And this, however, is a really tricky spot, because this is not your arrival point for the second part. This anticipates what is coming right here. It's a preparation. So you have to be really careful, and this has to be a real piano for the other part, 4 bars after that, to come through. There is very little crescendo here. It's marked, but it's a crescendo within piano dynamic to mezzo piano perhaps, and then you have to come back, and here you really have to make a rallentando and breathe before this part. This is our B section, by the way, where our B section begins, what we saw and what we looked at the beginning. Oboe. Tirara. Breathe. Tirari, tirari, tarari. This is magical, and if you remember, if you were here in the live session of last week, I actually showed this, used this passage in particular as a way to use the left hand and the right hand in a very well, let's say creative, but it's not really creative, it's just coming out of the music. So in a way that you can express your musicality and what's in the music without doing 1 2 3 1 2 3, which is totally meaningless, and it's so against the music that I cannot even believe that it can be done. So instead of doing a pattern, I'm going to show this to you once again. Instead of doing a pattern here, you can arrive with your right hand on this part, and you have then switch to the left hand, get the crescendo, and open up. It's like a flower that's blossoming in your hands. You open up and you open up the phrase, and you know what's the reaction of the musician? They're going to look at you for the first 2 bars and they're like, what the hell is he doing? And then when you do this, it's like, oh yeah, now I get it. As long as you pulse in between beats where they actually need it in order to keep the tempo that you want to establish, as long as you pulse there, they will have no problem in following you. But they will wonder why you're doing what it is that you're doing, and when you come on the 3rd bar of that particular passage, then the magic will be revealed. By the way, this is called, at least partially, visual score study, which is a way of looking at the score and making up, part at least, of a way of looking at the score and making up your technique based on what's on the score and not based on a freaking pattern. Moving on, this beautiful moment needs to breathe all the way through. And here is the same thing. You do a small rallentando, you breathe before you begin the next phrase, which is the same exact material. It's now only played, this main theme is played by the strings. And you have this little so to speak, triplets on top, which unsettle the rhythm because they're triplets, but the rhythm is tira, 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 tira. It's two, it's two, it's two, it's two, it's two. So it's 2 against 3. Against the sextuplets of the harps, against a regular 3 binary rhythm of the strings. So in this part is so well constructed that the less you do, the better it is. Do not disturb the music. Just give it, breathe with it, and once it's started, you can just let it go and enjoy the ride. The players will play. There is one place when you need to pick it up, which is right here, because here you can actually drive a little more of a crescendo and you can make more of push and pull, especially on the triplets of the strings. This kind of figures when you get here, tirari tirin tariram pirariririra tin tiriririm tim, so that you go into the phrase, you get to the fortissimo, and then you pull back, and then you come back to the forte, and then slowly you keep this game of push and pull going. And so forth. This is how this music takes form and stays alive. Otherwise, if you don't put this type of things in it, it's dead. It dies completely. Slowly but surely, we go back to our A section. And now look at how it is this time. You have, as I mentioned earlier, you have held notes from the strings underneath. So it's a very subtle layer of harmony that sits there. On top of that, you have the harp that creates the movement, and then on top of that you have finally the melody. This time everything is in 4/4. Now, why is it in 4/4? Well, with the triplets or sextuplets actually of the harp, we have 2 different dimensions here. The sextuplet of the harp and this line with 8 notes and a triplet of 8 notes. The triplet of 8 notes and the 8 notes already create a tension of 2 against 3. Besides, from a purely practical point of view, the fact that it is in 4/4, it makes it much easier for the players to go together than if it was written in 12/8 or in 9/8. Once you get out of the first time that the first theme repeats and comes back, then you get into these 2 bars who are a little more animated. That's what this means. Un peu plus animé. A little more lively. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to. This phrase by this line of the oboe. This is an accompaniment underneath. It's like sort of small waves moving underneath. And these to me are sort of little splashes of water that come out. Same thing here. You go back to the first theme, and then we have our splashes of water again. And we're slowly but surely approaching the end. Perhaps the dream is about to end, perhaps the faun is going back to sleep, but this third time that the theme comes back, combined with this line of the first violins, really seems to me like tells me, or seems to me like the faun is slowly but surely giving up on his nymphs and going back into La La Land. Everything slows down. Everything slows down, and this is like the last thing that the theme comes back, and it's in combination with a cello solo. Now this one you really have to conduct and to be clear, because you have two players playing exactly the same thing at the same time, and usually they're quite far away from each other, so you really need to be clear in your conducting on what it is that you want, where it is that you want the rallentando, the crescendo, the push, the pull, and everything else. This needs to be extremely clear. Same for the ritenuto. This is, technically speaking, it's quite difficult to keep together. So the best advice that I can give you here is to not fuss around with this. Keep it clear and do whatever rallentando that you need to be doing, because you need to keep doing the rallentando over and over again, and all this last part starting at part 12 at number 12 is extremely it's not extremely difficult, because it's not that difficult once you get into it, but it's extremely tricky. Yeah, it's like a little bit, you have to be very sensitive, no big gestures, very focused gestures. That's the point. And once you get to the end, you can subdivide. You can even subdivide from here if you want, because you have to make rallentando all the way to the end. You can subdivide from here, and you can give a really clear cue to the harp. And of course, what you need not to forget are the antique cymbals right here, which add that touch of exotism to the end of the piece. And so if you look at the last bar, there is no hold on it. It stops with 1/8 note from the flutes, and okay, this is held from the antique cymbals, but you have a pizzicato underneath of cellos and basses. So what you need to do here, in order for this to be clearly taken off together by everyone who's involved in it, you click with your right hand to give the pizzicato, so that the pizzicato is clear, and you close the hole, you close the winds at the same time, like this, and boom, so that the closing movement comes when this goes down. 1, 2, and they will close exactly the moment that the pizzicato goes down. This is about it for this short insight and analysis of this piece. I have one more thing to show you, which I will leave actually in as a link later on in the description of the video, because this is something that my teacher gave me actually. many years ago, and I carry always with me in the score of this Debussy. This is a translation in English, which is handy if you don't read French. It's perfectly fine. If you do read and know French, actually, is much better if you read it in French, of course, because you can pick up on the nuances of the language. But you can also do it side by side. But aside from the translation of the original piece, the original Mallarmé poem, it also has down here at the bottom of the document, it has the measures. So which measures in the score corresponds to which line of the poem. And this helped me quite a bit in finding correspondences between the score and the poem. I really hope it will help you too. Oh, I really talked for almost an hour here. Okay, this was quite a long stream. If you have any questions, please, by all means, now it's up to you to type them in the chat, and I will try to answer them. If you have any questions. If you don't have any questions, or if some questions come out later, then you can always ask them in the Facebook group, or send me a private message. It doesn't matter. Again, I will try my best to answer your questions. I hope that you actually enjoyed this live sessions. Let me know what you think about the live session itself, and if you did enjoy the live session, please do leave me a comment somewhere in the Facebook group, so it will be helpful feedback for myself, and will be helpful also for other people who will want to join perhaps future live sessions. Oh, right. As you know, I have a Patreon page right now, which you can visit on patreon.com/conductingpills. This particular video will be still free to watch, because I know there's quite a certain amount of information actually that I've given you tonight, so will remain free to watch until Sunday. I will put a link up for it. Well, you still have the link if you're here. It'll still be the same link, but I'll put also a link tomorrow in the chat, sorry, in the Facebook group, and that's it. I see there are no questions, so thank you very much for coming tonight and to this live session, and I will see you next time. Till then, bye bye.